So last evening, I instructed our negotiators to return to Ottawa. We cannot accept what they've offered, and we will not give what they've asked. Canada fuels American growth, supplying 99% of their natural gas imports, 85% of their electricity imports, 60% of their crude oil imports. I don't think they want us to stop sending any of that energy. In short, they asked too much and they offered too little. More fundamentally, the cumulative effect of U.S. demands revealed the limits of their commitment to a true economic partnership. As I said earlier, as a result, last evening I suspended trade negotiations with the United States and directed our negotiators to return to Ottawa. I want to thank Minister LeBlanc and our chief negotiator, Janice Charette, their team.
Mark Carney has just told Donald Trump that Canada will not be broken. In one press conference, he suspended every trade negotiation with the United States, ordered the Canadian team home, and gave the reason without softening it. Their demands were too big. Their offers were too small. He said America has been using economic integration as a weapon. He said its signature is sometimes written in pencil. He listed the constantly rotating excuses for the tariffs: fentanyl one day, a Ronald Reagan ad the next, wildfire smoke after that, and then dismantled the claim that Canada is ripping America off. The merchandise deficit, he explained, exists only because America buys the overwhelming majority of its energy from Canada. This was not a diplomatic update. It was a public rejection of the entire American pressure campaign, and a declaration that Canada will not trade away sovereignty for a deal under deadline. Real ask from me before we continue. We are 28 videos into Unbiased Canada, and we are still sitting at only 500 subscribers. Every single subscribe on this channel is a huge help for our small team. If honest, no-spin coverage of what Ottawa is really doing matters to you, please hit that subscribe button right now. It costs you nothing. It means everything to us. Now let's get into what Carney said next.
The bonds between Canadians and Americans are long, and they remain strong. A mutually beneficial trade agreement is possible, one that respects our sovereignty, one that builds on our complementary strengths, one that lowers costs for families on both sides of the border, one that creates good jobs for our workers. Canada has always worked towards these goals, even while America's attention and dedication to them have wavered. We've consistently proposed long-term partnerships, while America has often pursued short-term transactions. The gap between partnership and competitor, unfortunately, has remained too wide in recent days. So last evening, I instructed our negotiators to return to Ottawa. We cannot accept what they've offered, and we will not give what they've asked.
Carney lays out the contrast in the sharpest way possible. Canada has always offered a long partnership. America has always chased short transactions. When the distance between those two positions became too wide to close, he ended the talks. We cannot accept what they've offered, and we will not give what they've asked. There is no hedging in that sentence, no invitation to keep talking under the same conditions. The door is closed until the terms actually change.
We've been under no illusions. We recognized from the start that America has changed. Early last year in this room, I observed that the decades-long process of steadily increasing integration between our economies was over. Our government understood before many that America would transform all of its commercial relationships, that it would put a series of tariffs on its closest allies and use economic integration as a weapon. We recognize that sometimes its signature was written in pencil. We worked in that context to try to strike a fair deal on which Canadian businesses and workers could rely. Our goal has always been to get the best deal for Canadians, Never a deal at any price or on any time frame.
That is the heart of the whole speech. Canada saw the change coming before most of the world was willing to say it out loud. America stopped treating economic integration as mutual strength and started treating it as a weapon. And that line about the American signature being written in pencil, that is not a poetic flourish. It means commitments can be erased whenever the political mood shifts. Against that reality, Canada's position has never changed. The best deal for Canadians, never a deal at any price, never a deal under any timeline.
Over the past year, the U.S. has imposed a series of tariffs that violate its commitment under our agreement with them in Mexico, so-called CUSMA. The United States has continually changed their rationale for these actions, from fentanyl to taxes on U.S. tech giants, to certification of U.S. aircraft, to the sharing of tolls of a bridge that Canada built and paid for, to our dairy policy, to provincial decisions not to sell American alcohol during the trade war, to a television advertisement that quoted Ronald Reagan, to smoke from wildfires while they threatened our communities. Another prominent justification for U.S. tariffs has been their claim that since the United States runs, quote, a trade deficit with Canada, we were ripping them off. Also a quote. But the U.S.'s narrow merchandise trade deficit only exists because the U.S. buys so much of its energy from Canada. Canada fuels American growth, supplying 99% of their natural gas imports, 85% of their electricity imports, 60% of their crude oil imports. I don't think they want us to stop sending any of that energy. And if you look more broadly at the comprehensive U.S.-Canada trade balance, which includes the many services from finance to entertainment that we buy from the United States, that shows a persistent American trade surplus. Most fundamentally, trade is about building mutual strength, creating a relationship that benefits both countries. For example, Canada is the largest customer for U.S. cars. In fact, we buy more American-built cars and trucks than the United Kingdom, Japan, and China combined. It's the same for American steel products. Canada is also the largest customer for 26 U.S. states and a top 3 customer for 45 U.S. states. Last year, Americans sold almost $600 billion in goods and services to Canadians. That's more than $1.6 billion every single day. On the other hand, Canadian exports to the United States lower costs for American families. In contrast, tariffs are taxes. Taxes which are ultimately paid by U.S. consumers.
Watch what Carney does here. He lists the rotating excuses for the tariffs: fentanyl, tech taxes, aircraft certification, a bridge Canada already paid for, dairy, provincial alcohol decisions, a Reagan advertisement, wildfire smoke, and lets the list itself expose the fact that none of it is consistent. Then he turns to the trade deficit lie. The only reason a merchandise deficit exists is because America buys 99% of its natural gas, 85% of its electricity, and 60% of its crude oil from Canada. Ask Donald Trump if he wants that supply to stop. The wider picture shows an American surplus, not a Canadian one, and every tariff Trump adds is paid at an American checkout counter, not a Canadian one.
Would say 2 things. One is there are some specifics, and I'll give you some examples, but it was also a cumulative aspect, as I mentioned in my remarks, about the willingness dans l'ensemble in total to enter into a true economic partnership. But in terms of specifics, I'll give you 3, and I know there's other questions. First, with respect to the auto industry, both in terms of the level of the tariffs, the treatment of Canadian content, so Canadian parts, Canadian steel, Canadian content in vehicles, the scope of the tariffs. The Americans wanted to limit it to autos only, not include medium and heavy autos and light trucks, to be more specific, not include medium and heavy-duty trucks, which is a big change, obviously. And with respect to Ford's new plan, for example, in Oakville, which is F-350s, 450s, 550s, they would have been excluded. GM Silverado, same thing, would have been excluded from that. No rationale, just for exclusion. So effectively moving into a series of terms that would made the production more uneconomic over time. Okay, so that's a change. That restriction, that clarification, that precision was a change. The U.S. introduced in the last hours, efforts to restrict our ability to have other trade deals. You heard me say a moment ago what we've accomplished in the last year, 20 new deals, economic and security partnerships. The prospect of doubling our market access because we believe in free trade. We're the partner of choice in many respects for countries around the world, and the Americans wanted to restrict that. They had language that they wanted to restrict that. Unacceptable.
That is what actually broke the talks. On autos, the Americans tried to leave out entire truck lines, F-350, GM Silverados, the Ford plant in Oakville, with no reason offered except leverage. On global trade, they wanted language that would restrict Canada's freedom to sign deals with anyone else. For a country that has closed more than 20 new trade agreements in a single year and is on track to double its market access, that demand was never going to fly. Carney called it what it is, a power play dressed up as a deal. The line Canada drew today is the one that will define what comes next. If this mattered to you, please subscribe. 28 videos in, 500 subscribers strong. Every single one of you helps us keep going. Hit like, share this video with a Canadian who needs to see it. Turn on notifications. This is Unbiased Canada.